The sun had barely risen when the tension on the dusty ranch road began to thicken like a brewing storm. Three HOA officers, dressed more like enforcers than community workers, marched toward Moloch's wooden gate with a kind of arrogance that suggested the land already belonged to them. Beyond the gate stretched acres of open fields, quiet cattle, and the peaceful home Malik had built with years of sweat and sacrifice, land that to him wasn't just property but a promise of safety and dignity. But as the HOA men approached, accompanied by a sheriff who raised a fabricated claim, Malik noticed something in their eyes. Not concern, not professionalism, something colder, something rooted in the belief that he, a black ranch owner in a predominantly white rural community, had no right to stand his ground. Their footsteps grew louder, their demands grew more aggressive. Their entitlement was unmistakable. What they didn't expect was that Malik would be waiting for them, calm, firm, and unmovable. He wasn't holding a rifle like the old ranchers in town. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was standing behind his locked gate, ready to protect what was his. What happened next would expose the hidden prejudice beneath their badges and clipboard. Sand it. All started with one sentence: my land, my rules, watch until the end. Wait a second, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more powerful and inspiring stories. Just like this one Moloch had moved to Ridgefield County 3 years ago, drawn by the quiet charm of open land and the promise of finally living somewhere where he wouldn't be crowded by city noise or suspicious glances. He purchased an old ranch and restored it himself, fixing the fences, repairing the barn, and nurturing his first few heads of cattle. It wasn't just a home, it was a dream he had carried since childhood, one shaped by his grandfather's stories of open skies and freedom. Neighbors were polite enough at first, quick nods, distant smiles, but after a few months, Malik began noticing subtle shifts. Conversations were cut short when he walked by cars slowed down near his driveway. A lingering sense of being watched, judged, or tolerated rather than welcomed. He brushed it aside. He had dealt with far worse in the past. The HOA, however, was different. Their attitude shifted almost immediately after Malik installed a sturdy wooden gate standard for rural properties, but apparently too bold for their liking. Sudden violation notices began appearing, claims about unauthorized fencing, incomplete paperwork, and non-uniform property appearance became routine. Malik calmly provided proof receipts and county approvals, each time winning the dispute, but each time fueling their irritation. The breaking point came when Malik refused to let them inspect his property without notice. He knew the law. He knew his rights, and he knew the difference between an inspection and an intrusion when he turned them away politely but firmly. Their faces hardened with silent fury. He didn't know then just how far they were willing to go. The trouble began early one morning when Malik heard the sound of tires grinding against gravel. He stepped onto his porch to see 3 HOA officers marching down his long dirt driveway, accompanied by a county sheriff's cruiser following behind them. The sight made his stomach tighten, not because he feared the law, but because he recognized the pattern. When people like him stood up for themselves, specific individuals suddenly felt the need to teach a lesson. Malik locked his gate and waited calmly behind it. The HOA men arrived first, already red-faced with irritation. They didn't ask, they demanded entry. No explanation, no paperwork, just an order cloaked in thinly veiled hostility. Malik told them as evenly as possible that no inspection could take place without written notice. Their expressions sharpened instantly. One officer leaned over the gate, scanning Malik up and down with an unsettling intensity. Another scribbled in his notepad with obvious exaggeration, as if documenting crimes that didn't exist. Then came the accusations. Anonymous complaints, noise disturbances, unauthorized livestock haul. Lies all designed to corner him. Malik refused again. Calmly, firmly. That was when the sheriff approached. The HOA men rushed toward him, talking over one another, pointing at Malik as if he were a threat. Malik watched the sheriff's expression shift. First neutral, then skeptical, then wary. Malik stepped forward, keeping his hands visible, heart pounding with memories of stories he wished didn't exist. He spoke carefully, explaining the lack of notice, the long pattern of harassment, and the sudden escalation. The sheriff listened but didn't respond right. Away, meanwhile, the HOA officers grew louder, angrier, desperate to paint Malik as non-compliant and aggressive there. Frustration exploded when Malik repeated the sentence that enraged them the first time "My land, my rules" one HOA officer radioed for further enforcement. Deliberately, in a dramatic tone, another began photographing Malik's gate as if building a case. The sheriff stepped between them, trying to maintain control, but the HOA men were beyond reason. Then things turned dangerous. The officers claimed Malik was being defensive and possibly armed, even though his hands were empty and visible. One even suggested he might be hiding something behind the gate. The sheriff tensed. Malik felt the air shift. Time slowed. The weight of possibility, tragic, historic, all too common, pressed on his chest. This was no longer about rules, it was about power, perception, and the prejudice that simmered beneath the surface. Sheriff stepped closer to the gate, one hand resting near his holster. Malik froze, not out of guilt, but out of the terrifying knowledge of how quickly situations like this could escalate for men who looked like him. The HOA officers watched eagerly, like hunters waiting for a cornered animal to make a wrong move. Their fabricated story was unraveling, and they wanted Malik to snap so they could justify everything. Instead, Malik raised his voice just enough for the sheriff to hear his steady, unwavering tone. He asked for documentation. He asked for the reason behind the sudden inspection. He asked what law specifically he was accused of violating. The sheriff hesitated. The HOA officers stiffened, caught off guard by Malik's composure. One of them barked that Malik was obstructing, pointing again at his locked gate. Malik reminded them, calmly yet firmly, that county law required a 48-hour written notice for non-emergency inspections. Silenced, the sheriff turned to the HOA officers and repeated the question Malik had asked. Do you have paperwork? Panic flickered across their faces. No papers, no complaints filed, no scheduled inspection, nothing. Then, in a moment that shifted the entire standoff, the sheriff ordered all 3 HOA officers to step back. There, outrage was instant. One tried to argue, another gestured wildly toward Malik's gate. The sheriff shut them down. The men who had marched onto Malik's land with arrogance now stood on the dirt road, humiliated and furious. Their plan had crumbled, their authority had cracked, and the truth had finally won room to breathe with. The HOA officers silenced. The sheriff approached Malik one last time, this time with a calmer, more respectful tone. He apologized for the confusion and confirmed that Malik had the legal right to deny entry without proper notice. He also warned the HOA officers to handle future concerns through official channels, not intimidation. The HOA men left in a swirl of dust and bitterness, muttering about fines, board meetings, and non-compliance. But their voices had lost their weight. Neighbors, who had quietly gathered at a distance, watched the scene unfold, some shocked, some ashamed, some unwilling to meet Malik's eyes. Malik felt the adrenaline fade, leaving behind a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. He hadn't raised a weapon, he hadn't shouted. He had stood his ground, protected his home, and refused to bow to the prejudice disguised as regulation. As he walked back toward his house, he understood something deeper. This fight wasn't just about a gate. It was about existence, about being seen. As an equal in a place where some still believed he didn't belong, he closed his gate and looked over his land. The pastures, the quiet fields, the home he built. He had defended it with nothing but truth and courage, but he also knew this wasn't the last time he would need to stand firm, because racism doesn't always come loudly. Sometimes it arrives holding a clipboard, wearing a badge, or pretending to follow rules. The real question is, how many more times must someone prove they belong on land they already own? Where are you watching from? Which country and city? Take care.